Support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
The historically high number of people who want to work and don't have a job still plagues us. This elevated rate of those without a job are codependent with things like workforce development, the skills gap, retraining, and the success or failure of primary education. These are big issues we face. Welcome again to the most widely watched program on Carolina business and public policy for more than 20 years now. I'm Chris William, and so far in 2013, the Carolinas continue to rank in the bottom of the states with the worst rate of unemployment. North Carolina is 8.7%, and South Carolina slightly better at 8.1%. How long can this condition persist? And how much of a drag is it on growth? And what do insiders see that we could be doing differently if public policy and should public policy change? We'll start this dialogue in just a moment. And later on, the chief of the Palmetto State's Department of Employment and Workforce, Cheryl Stanton, joins us.
Major funding also by Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. This edition of Carolina Business Review was recorded November 7th, 2013. On this week's program, John Gessaman of Carolina's Gateway Partnership, Louis Gossett of the South Carolina Manufacturers Alliance, and special guest Cheryl Stanton, Executive Director of the South Carolina Department of Employment and Workforce. And now, here's Chris Williams.
Hello, welcome back to our program. Louis, John, good to have you both here. And welcome back. Louis, I'm going to start with you. You know, there's so many things swirling around workforce development. There's education, there's retraining, there is the rate of unemployment, and we're going to get to it with our guest a little bit later on. But before we get into that, wade into that, you know, one of these issues in cooking in South Carolina now for a while, during the last session in the State House, with some back and forth, the state did approve $500 million in transportation bonds, which was good for the state. Things like I-26, 526 around Charleston, I-73, I-85, and so on and so forth. But you know, the financing is approved, but now it seems that those representatives in the State House can't seem to decide where to start. What's the problem, and when does this start to become a liability?
Well, I think, Chris, that it's a age-old problem with road money and spending on infrastructure is who's going to get what? Where's it going to go? The nice thing about South Carolina is we do have, I believe it's Act 114, which was passed a number of years ago by the General Assembly, which lays out some priorities. And those priorities are, from the Manufacturers Alliance perspective, very, very encouraging, because what they focus on are the places where our trucks need to move. From the port, from the upstate, that sort of thing, from the centers of industry and so on. And so you're going to see some movement on significant projects on I-85 and I-26, which are particularly important to us. And we've already seen that there have been some decisions that look like are going to be made that will result in those projects coming to fruition. But yeah, it's a legitimate issue and a concern that we've always had, is that once you start talking about spending money on roads, it's going to become very parochial. And traditionally in South Carolina, it's been a political hot potato. And folks around the state have gotten theirs, whether it was good for the entire state or not.
Well, and you know, we were talking off camera, and there are a lot of problem areas, and we think at Charleston and 526, but I've got to think that the I-26 widening between I-95 and Columbia has got to be, if not number one, it's got to be number two on the list, somewhere in there.
It's way up there. Now, there is good news already on that front, in that from exit 116, which is where 77 intersects 26, up to St. Matthews, which is about 21 miles, has already been approved and will be, before this money was appropriated, and will be in the works soon. But absolutely, 26 from, in essence, border to border, and 85 from border to border need work, and they need more capacity.
Yeah, you know, North Carolina, the good road state, John, here you are, you know, Rocky Mount located on I-95. You know, we all, well, it's not fair to say, but many people avoid I-95 because of the way that 95 is. It's fast, it's narrow. North Carolina, during the last legislative session, has also approved a new funding formula in North Carolina's Department of Transportation. How does that affect what's going to happen with I-95 or other projects around Rocky Mountain?
My quick answer to that is I don't know, which is an easy one. But I think the challenge is we're talking about dividing up a static or shrinking pie. And no matter how you slice it, and it is going to get sliced a little different under the formula, and it's hard to argue with a formula that says we're going to spend the money where it's going to do the greatest good. That's the theory in the new formula.
Right.
Now, I'll go back to the statement that was made. It doesn't take long before everybody to think their own highway is the most important one. But the real problem is if the numbers stay where they are, it's really equivalent to shrinking. And however we got where we are, as a nation, even as a state, there just isn't enough money to do the necessary maintenance in this good roads state. We have a wonderful highway network. It's why we're here. But we need more money. And maybe tolls aren't the answer. I don't know what is the answer, but we got to figure out one, because we can't keep up with the repairs and do the great new projects that need to be done.
Let's shift to some unemployment workforce development. Lewis, in South Carolina, not just being part of the Manufacturers Alliance, as you've been for a long time, but you understand it better than most. So you've got South Carolina, over 8% unemployment rate. I mean, this has got to be a bit of a drag on some of the growth and development, but more than that. You know, many employers, many of your members talk about skills gap and not being able to find the workers that they need. That seems crazy.
It's an absolute critical issue in South Carolina, and we think it's probably the single biggest issue that we're going to face if South Carolina is going to continue to participate in the reshoring phenomenon that's probably occurring out there in manufacturing. What we see is that the people that are out there, and there's 180 or so thousand people in South Carolina that are unemployed, they don't have the skills to move into the facilities that we have with the sophisticated machinery and products. And so that's a challenge. In South Carolina,
wait a minute, let me interrupt you. Do they not have it because they don't know they're supposed to do this? Or there's not enough money for them to retrain? Or they're just not willing to do it?
Actually, I think it's more of the first, that they don't know. And that's part of our mission, is to educate kids and their parents that there are opportunities in manufacturing, but in order to take advantage of those opportunities, they've got to get the right skill set. That skill set, by the way, is far more often found in a technical college than it is a four-year school. And they need to understand that the real opportunities for good wages and benefits might in fact be there at that local technical college. But it's really a question of folks don't understand as much as they should that a modern manufacturing facility may not have quite as many people as you would have seen in the past, but the processes and the products and the machinery are extremely sophisticated, and you can't just walk in off the street and go to work. It takes a great deal of skill and a great deal of training, and so South Carolina's task going forward is going to be to find a way to match those two things together, to have those two ships that right now are passing each other in the night meet each other, the skill level of our people, the actual skills that they have, and the jobs that are available.
Yeah.
If we don't, we will miss the reshoring phenomena that's occurring.
We have about a minute before we bring on our special guest. John, you hear what Lewis says, you know what happens in Rocky Mountain, points further. Heck, you even announced that you've got almost a $300 million project in Hospira. So when you hear this idea of skills gap, what kind of buttons does that push for you?
The community college button. You go back to the K-12 button too, or pre-K even, button to get those young adults ready for a world where they are literate in math, science, and articulate, so that we can take those technology jobs. It's not a problem with us. I was at a gathering of international economic development folks, and this is a nationwide issue. And part of that is—
We're talking about the skills gap issue?
Part of this issue, I think, is because of the rate of change in which we are going through. And you go onto a manufacturing floor, talking about that today, it doesn't look anything like what it did 10 years ago. How you can't keep up with it without the retraining. And so it takes a lot of effort and, you know, frankly, fewer people.
So then now I want to wrap this up because we got to get our executive director out here, but how do you make the argument, and you just said it yourself, John, that the pie hasn't gotten any bigger, so we need to figure out how we're going to slice the pie. So if the funding formula for DOT is this, if commerce wants to do this, if education needs this, then how do you raise your hand and say, listen, this skills gap thing is the most primary, we need to front end load this, and we need to do it for 1 year or 3 years, but we have to do it soon. Is that what you're saying?
No. And I'm not saying any one of those is more important than the other, because I think you've got to work with multiple priorities, and that is the challenge in today's very complex world. We're more connected. Yeah. These companies deal around the globe, and we got to find ways to deal with all of these issues. It's very complicated.
I wish we had more time. You know, as you well said, it's one of the primary considerations, and we'll keep the dialogue going. Guys, stay with us as we bring our guest out. Next week on this program, we do a political reporter roundtable. And you know what's great about these guys is they are not shy at all about how they feel about politics, about the civility of the dialogue, about intergovernmental relations. Take your pick. We'll talk about it next week on this program. And then in 2 weeks, he has been here before, and he's coming back with even more success under his belt. He is the CEO of South Carolina Bank and Trust. His name is Robert Hill, and Robert and company have made huge strides in growth of that bank in the state of South Carolina. Speaking of South Carolina, the South Carolina Department of Employment and Workforce's website says that they are, and I quote, dedicated to putting South Carolinians back to work. End quote. DEW, as it is called, is one of the state's 16 cabinet agencies that reports to the executive branch. So you could deduce that it is the workforce administrative organization for South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley. Joining us now, South Carolina Department of Employment and Workforce Executive Director Cheryl Stanton. Cheryl, welcome, and welcome south, by the way.
Thank you.
Coming down from New York.
I
It's
appreciate
a better
that.
place to be, obviously. Cheryl, you know, you've heard the dialogue about this skills gap thing. How can DEW, how does employment and workforce lean into that, and what can you be doing that maybe is not widely known to help this issue?
I think there are a couple of things. First of all, we can help educate the public. When I arrived in South Carolina, people kept giving me this piece of slide that showed the skills gap in South Carolina. They came out of the Department of Employment and Workforce Labor Market Information Group. So we can help educate and identify where the skills gap is so people in South Carolina can make decisions about how to close it. But more importantly, I think what we can do is bring people together. A couple of years ago, it was discovered that there was about $1 billion of workforce development money coming into South Carolina, but there hasn't been a good job of laying out a map of where that money is and where the different programs are within South Carolina. So to get the inventory of what those programs are and then map them out and say, okay, we have some good work here, we have some good things going on here, how do we bridge it so that the programs feed into one another and that there isn't too much overlap in the programs? We can take on that facilitator role.
Lewis?
Cheryl, in just a few months you've been there, we've already seen you tackle some really big initiatives, including the IT situation at your agency and the challenges you face there. And for the first time, we've seen some movement there. Can you talk a little bit about how you're confronting the information technology deficit that agency's had and how it's impeded its ability to do work until you got there?
Certainly. I mean, this is a problem that almost every workforce agency is having in the country right now. And in fact, we are getting to partner with North Carolina as well as Georgia to tackle this. We have the third oldest information technology system for our UI benefits. And as you know, about 4 or 5 years ago, South Carolina did a great job of modernizing the UI legal side, how the system works.
Is this the unemployment insurance issue?
Correct.
Yes. Okay.
But we did not do as good we did not at the time have the opportunity to upgrade the IT system to keep up. And so as a result of that, what has happened is every time we go to make a change, for instance, in South Carolina, we went from 26 weeks to 20 weeks of benefits. The amount of time it takes our COBOL programmers to sit down and change that, and the amount of money that costs the South Carolina taxpayer is much bigger than anyone would realize. Because of that, the U.S. Department of Labor has recognized that these systems are expensive to build, and are encouraging states like South Carolina to partner with North Carolina, to partner with Georgia, and to build systems together so that in the future, as changes are made to the UI laws, the technology system can keep up with them.
You know, let me just jump in here for a second, John. You know, companies have been doing this for a while, Cheryl. You've heard of shared services. Is this, is this a new frontier for states like South Carolina and North Carolina?
We are one of the first consortiums. There are multiple other consortiums going on in the country, but that's exactly what the U.S. Department of Labor was saying, is why can't we build on economies of scales as private industry has done before? When we did the feasibility study, 85% of our UI laws overlap. So we can build a system that 85% of it works for all 3 states, and then we can customize the remaining 15% for each of the 3 states. So that's exactly what the Department of Labor is trying to encourage.
Yeah, thanks, John. Go ahead.
Well, South Carolina certainly has had strong background manufacturing. We talked about that. Economic development-wise, it's very competitive with all the other places. What do you think South Carolina is doing right from your perspective among all the things in your part of the world that you see?
Well, I think the first thing that South Carolina does very well is government gets out of the way of business and allows business to develop itself. And it fosters an environment that is very business friendly so that it's very encouraging to businesses to join the state. But from a workforce development side, what we've done is, again, we have a number of tremendously strong programs where when a business comes into South Carolina, we help them identify the pipeline, identify potential employees, help train them. We have apprenticeship programs. We have various ways to make sure that the employers are getting the employees they need. Now, that being said, there's a lot of opportunities in that as we bring in more employers, there's a bigger challenge to make sure that we have that pipeline continue and that the employees that are easy to employ and easy to get up to the training level and the skill level that is needed for these new employers, that there's a backfill of employees moving up the pipeline so that the next employer who comes in has more employees to hire as well.
Cheryl, you and I were recently in Clarendon County together, where that county, relatively rural county in South Carolina on 995, became one of the first or second counties in the nation to be certified as a certified work-ready community. That's a big deal to manufacturing, and I know it's a priority for you. Could you talk a little bit about that and what you're doing with work-ready communities?
Absolutely. I mean, South Carolina is very blessed in that all 46 of its counties agreed to participate in the work-ready communities. And it's a multi-agency effort, as you well know, Lewis, in South Carolina. We have different components that are helping with it, but one of the things the department is doing is we are helping with the job profiling. As you know, with the work-ready communities, you not only help train and test the individuals to make sure that they have the right certification level, and you also give them some soft skills training under the South Carolina model, of course. But on the other side is you get the businesses involved as well, and you do job profiling for some of their positions so that they can match what these certifications mean for the specific jobs that they have. Well, the Department of Employment just recently signed a contract with ACT to pay for a number of these job profiles over the next 2 years to make sure that we're encouraging and have businesses who can use the work-ready certificates in a really positive way for South Carolina.
Has that ACT and has that certification, at least to date, has it been all that you expected that it would be?
We have found that the Work Ready Community Initiative has been fantastic in that we're really finding that they're a great partner to help us prepare this workforce, but also that the businesses are responding well to it as well. It's something that the businesses find to be an effective tool, and that's the most important thing, because to put individuals through these trainings and through the certifications and then not have jobs on the back end would be a waste of everybody's time.
John? I think that the system that we have now in North Carolina, probably more familiar than South Carolina, but it does vary state to state how these issues are handled, and it's kind of complicated. If you were able to wave a wand, how would you, I guess I want to say, is the system we have sustainable, or maybe what would you do to change it?
I think the most important thing we need to do right now is get everybody to the table and make sure that we have a strategic plan on how we're doing workforce development. I know in South Carolina, as I said, there's so many good programs going on, and as I go around the state, I hear different pockets of successes, especially in the local areas, that's working for one area and working for another area. what I'd like to see, if I could wave my magic wand, is get everybody together so we get that strategic plan together, but we also share those best practices. So what's working up in the upstate, making sure the low country knows about that program, I think that's a really big part of it.
You know, we've talked on this program before, Cheryl, about the technical college system. In South Carolina, it's technical college. In North Carolina, it's community college. But in the technical college system takes some criticism because and I'll just say it, in Horry Georgetown Tech, there were businesses that I have spoken to that said Horry Georgetown Tech is a good school, but they're advertising as a place to get a begin to get a four-year degree, and not as a place for workforce development. So places like Horry Georgetown Tech that do advertise to that, is their role an entry level for a four-year degree, or is it workforce development?
I would encourage and push for the technical colleges to work on workforce development, and we are really lucky in South Carolina that so many of them do. And I think even Horry Technical College is doing that. What happens is, though, I think they can't do it alone. They can't in a vacuum have great non-certification programs that are technical skills oriented unless they know what jobs that they're training individuals for. Again, it's no good to put someone through a non-certification program and then not have something for them to be able to do on the back end. So it's so important for businesses to partner with the technical colleges to say where their needs are and where they're going to be in the short term, the middle term, and the long term, so that the technical colleges can work with those businesses to create the non-certification programs that individuals go through, so that on the back end they're qualified for the jobs that are out there.
So Louis, I mean, you've been around, and I don't want to break the kind of the momentum we got here, but is that it, that they can't afford to fund the workforce development, so they have to go after that student who wants to come in? Is that how
Absolutely part of it, and that's an unfortunate thing from the technical college's perspective, is that they are not adequately funded. And that's something very unusual for somebody who looks at limited government like I do to say, but they are not adequately funded. And the training for, or the education for people who might want to go into the four-year track is very inexpensive. It's a classroom and a lecture. Whereas the training that's required for either manufacturing or allied health is very expensive machinery, stations, and very specialized instructors. And so the technical college system is left with that. You also, Chris, though, have to say something. There's some demand for it.
Yeah.
It is a relatively inexpensive way to get kids from high school who want to go into four-year. And one last thing about it that's very important that technical college presidents have told me, a lot of times kids get there thinking that their path is the four-year way, and they get to the technical college and realize the path to the $50,000, $60,000, $80,000 a year job is over there with the technical side, and that's where they wind up.
Yeah. I got you off track here. You have a question for Cheryl?
Well, it was going to be along those lines, Cheryl. You know, is what kinds of things do you think we should be doing with kids and their parents to explain to them where the real opportunities are? That's a big struggle for us, is getting those kids interested in really what the jobs of the future are, and where should they be emphasizing their studies and their planning.
Absolutely, and I think I would take it one step further. I'd start with the guidance counselors, because the guidance counselors are there year after year, and they can be the biggest sales for us, helping with workforce development and identifying that information. Again, DUE can provide a lot of information from the LMI side in terms of where they see the jobs going, but until the guidance counselors really understand what that looks like in the real world and then take it a step further, bring in the parents and the students to show that, we're never going to get traction in K through 12. I will tell you, as I go around the state and talk to different employers, one of the things that works tremendously well is when businesses go in and explain to students what the job opportunities are on the back end if they look at advanced manufacturing, if they look at IT, if they look at healthcare. And I'll tell you that the thing that seems to work the most is the biggest salespeople for these businesses are the relatively younger people who are doing the jobs who look and sound like the kids that they're talking to. So if you can get your own workforce into the schools and explain to them exactly what these jobs are, that the advanced manufacturing, I think you said this earlier, advanced manufacturing isn't the factory of yesteryear. It isn't what the textile mills were. These are incredibly clean. They're incredibly safe. The other day I was in a facility where people weren't even wearing earplugs because it was that quiet, because it's so technology driven now. And so explaining that to kids, explaining that to parents, but really on the front end, explaining it to guidance counselors so they can share that message year after year, I think is really important.
Cheryl, thank you. We didn't always run out of time when we get to start getting to the meat of it, but thank you so much. We'll have you back. Please do come back.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And congratulations on the job. Good to have you here in the South again.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Nice to see it. John, welcome. Thanks for coming in from Rocky Mount as always. And Lewis, can I say it's always good to have you here.
Glad to be here, Chris.
Okay, thank you. I'm Chris William, and we hope that you watch next week. And if you have any comments or questions, please go to the website, carolinabusinessreview.org, and make your comments, make your suggestions for programming, or you can simply watch programs there. Next week on our program, Political Reporter Roundtable, Robert Hill from South Carolina Bank and Trust in 2 weeks. I'm Chris William. Until next time, good night, and thank you for watching.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care, when and where you need it. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.com.